Desperation tastes like cheap champagne and expensive cologne. When Sloane saw her ex walking toward her with his new bride, armed with pitying smiles, she panicked. She didn't think. She just grabbed the nearest guy at the bar, a stranger in a sharp, dark suit, and pulled him in. It was supposed to be a 5-second lie to save her pride. She didn't know the lips she just bruised belonged to the most ruthless syndicate boss on the East Coast, and he doesn't forgive debts. The string quartet was butchering a pop song. It was a slow, agonizing rendition of something you'd normally hear at a nightclub at 2 a.m, now sanitized for the botanical gardens of a country club. Sloane stood by the ice sculpture of 2 swans, gripping a flute of lukewarm Prosecco. She was 28, exhausted, and wearing a navy slip dress that felt too thin for the crisp October air. She shouldn't have come. Everyone had told her not to. Her sister had literally stood in front of her apartment door that morning. "It's Carter's wedding, Sloane. You're the ex-fiancée. You're going to look pathetic." She had come anyway. Stubbornness was a flaw she wore like a shield. She wanted to prove she was fine. She wanted to prove Carter hadn't broken her when he ended their 5-year relationship to propose to a 22-year-old marketing assistant 6 months later. She was not fine. The botanical garden was a sea of pastel chiffon and forced laughter. Sloane felt the eyes on her, the whispers. Every time she turned around, another mutual friend would offer a tight, sympathetic smile. It was suffocating. Then the crowd parted. Carter was walking toward the bar. Beside him was Paige, the bride. Paige looked flawless. Her dress was an explosion of imported lace. Her smile was radiant, heavily subsidized by generational wealth. They were making their rounds, thanking the guests, and they were looking right at Sloane. Carter's expression shifted. The polite groom's smile melted into a look of profound, unbearable pity. He was coming over to be magnanimous. He was going to thank her for being the bigger person. He was going to hold Paige's hand while he did it. Sloane's stomach dropped. Nausea hit her in a cold, sharp wave. She looked around for an exit, but the catering staff had blocked the main path with a tray of bacon-wrapped dates. The restroom was too far. The gardens were fenced. Carter was 10 feet away, 8 feet. "Don't look at me like that," Sloane thought. "Don't you dare pity me." Panic bypassed her prefrontal cortex. It seized her limbs. She turned abruptly toward the bar. There was a man standing there. He hadn't been part of the wedding crowd. He wasn't wearing pastel. He wore a charcoal suit cut so sharply it looked dangerous. No tie, top button undone. He was tall, broad-shouldered, staring down at a glass of amber liquid with absolute indifference. He radiated stillness, a quiet, heavy gravity in a room full of fluttering birds. 4 feet away, Carter opened his mouth. "Sloane, hey!" Sloane lunged. She grabbed the lapels of the charcoal suit. The fabric felt incredibly expensive, heavy wool and silk. She didn't look at the man's face. She didn't give him a chance to speak. She just yanked him down by his collar, went up on her toes, and crushed her mouth against his. For a split second, time stopped. The man turned to stone. He didn't yield. He didn't push her away either. It was like kissing a marble statue that happened to breathe. Sloane closed her eyes tight. The smell of him filled her senses. It wasn't standard men's body wash. It was sandalwood, ozone, and a faint, sharp, metallic scent she couldn't place. Gun oil. Smoke. Beneath her hands, she felt a sudden, violent shift. The muscles in his chest locked. A large, warm hand clamped around her waist. It wasn't a romantic embrace. It was a vice grip. It was the grip of someone assessing a threat, neutralizing a variable. His fingers dug sharply into the soft flesh of her hip, through the thin silk of her dress. She opened her eyes just a fraction. He was looking down at her. His eyes were open. They were dark, almost black, and utterly flat. There was no surprise in them, no amusement, just a cold, calculating void that made the hair on her arms stand up. Sloane's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She broke the kiss, gasping slightly, stepping back but still trapped by the hand on her hip. She glanced over her shoulder. Carter had stopped dead in his tracks. His mouth hung open. Paige blinked, her flawless smile faltering into genuine confusion. "Sorry," Sloane breathed loud enough for Carter to hear. She looked back at the stranger, forcing a bright, manic smile. "I missed you." The stranger said nothing. His gaze flicked from Sloane to Carter, then back to Sloane. He released her waist slowly. His fingers lingered for a fraction of a second, a phantom weight that burned through the navy silk. "My mistake," the stranger said. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that barely carried over the string quartet, but it commanded the air around it. Sloane didn't wait for Carter to speak. She didn't wait to see if the stranger would call security. The adrenaline had maxed out, leaving behind a desperate need to flee. She turned on her heel, pushed past a startled waiter, and practically ran toward the valet. She didn't realize until she was halfway home in a cab that her hands were shaking. She didn't realize until she reached her apartment that she had left her clutch on the bar, her keys, her ID, her phone, all sitting next to the man in the charcoal suit. Monday morning smelled like stale coffee and regret. Sloane worked at a mid-tier architectural firm in the city, entirely dedicated to designing uninspired office parks. Her job was logistics and client relations. It meant she spent 9 hours a day apologizing for delayed shipments of frosted glass. She sat at her desk, staring at her monitor. The spreadsheet numbers blurred together. She had spent Sunday in a fugue state, tearing her apartment apart for her spare keys and cancelling her credit cards. The missing phone was the worst part. She was disconnected from the world, which was a blessing when it came to avoiding her sister's inevitable barrage of text messages, but a curse when it came to functioning as an adult. Her head throbbed. The phantom sensation of the stranger's mouth still ghosted against her lips. The terrifying flat look in his eyes kept flashing in her mind every time she blinked. Just a guy at a bar, she told herself for the 100th time. Probably some rich uncle or a hedge fund manager. He was wearing an expensive suit. He's not going to hunt you down. Sloane. She jumped, her knee slamming into the underside of her desk. Her manager, a nervous man named David, was standing by her cubicle. He was sweating through his pale yellow button-down. Behind him stood 2 men. They were not architects. They wore suits that didn't fit quite right, too tight across the shoulders, a little too bulky around the waistline. One had a thick, flattened nose that looked like it had been broken and reset by an amateur. The other was tall, gaunt, with slicked back hair and dead eyes. "These, gentlemen are here to see you," David said. His voice cracked. He looked at the floor. Sloane stood up slowly. The hum of the office around her seemed to fade out. "Can I help you?" The gaunt man stepped forward. He didn't smile. He reached into his jacket pocket. Sloane flinched, a primal instinct kicking in. The man noticed the flinch. A small, cruel smirk touched the corner of his mouth. He pulled out a sleek, black leather envelope and dropped it on her desk. "You left something at the club on Saturday," the man said. His accent was thick, distinctly South Philly. Sloane stared at the envelope. She didn't want to touch it. "My purse?" "Just open it." She reached out. Her fingers were trembling slightly. She hated that they could see it. She untied the leather string and tipped the envelope upside down. Her driver's license slid out. Just the license. No credit cards. No phone. "Where is the rest of it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Mr. Costa wants a word," the gaunt man said. "He has the rest of your property." "Mr. Costa," Sloane repeated. The name meant nothing to her, but the way the man said it, with a heavy, reverent finality, made her stomach clench. "Look, I don't know who that is. I had a lot to drink. I grabbed a guy to make my ex jealous. It was stupid. Tell him I'm sorry. Keep the phone. I don't care." She went to sit back down. The man with the broken nose put a massive, calloused hand flat on her keyboard. He leaned in. He smelled like garlic and stale tobacco. "It wasn't a request, sweetheart. Grab your coat." Sloane looked at David. Her manager had retreated 3 steps back, staring at the ceiling tiles, completely abandoning her. She looked around the open-plan office. Dozens of people. Nobody was looking at her. The silence in the room was deliberate and terrifying. She realized with a sudden icy clarity that screaming wouldn't help. She picked up her wool coat from the back of her chair. She didn't grab her bag. She just walked around the desk. The 2 men flanked her. They didn't touch her, but they didn't need to. Their presence was a physical wall, guiding her toward the elevator, down to the underground parking garage, and into the back of a black SUV with heavily tinted windows. The ride was silent. Sloane watched the city blur by. They crossed the bridge, leaving the polished glass and steel of the commercial district, descending into the gritty industrial sprawl of the docks. Rows of shipping containers stacked like building blocks. Warehouses with broken windows. The SUV pulled into an alley behind a meatpacking facility. The smell of copper and salt water permeated the air, thick and metallic. "Out," the gaunt man said. Sloane stepped onto the wet asphalt. Her sensible work heels clicked, echoing against the brick walls. They led her through a heavy steel door, down a brightly lit corridor that smelled aggressively of bleach, and up a flight of metal stairs. At the top of the stairs was a heavy wooden door. The gaunt man knocked once, opened it, and gestured for her to go inside. Sloane walked in. The door clicked shut behind her. The room was a jarring contrast to the slaughterhouse below. It was an office, sparsely furnished, but impeccably clean. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the grey water of the harbour. A massive oak desk sat in the centre. Sitting behind the desk was the man in the charcoal suit. He wasn't wearing a jacket today. He wore a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and faint faded scars. He was reading a file. He didn't look up when she entered. Sloane stood by the door. 10 seconds passed, then 20. The silence stretched tight as a piano wire. He was making her wait. It was a power play, and it was working. Her pulse pounded in her throat. "Vincent Costa," she finally said. Her voice sounded thin in the large room. He closed the file. He moved slowly, deliberately. He folded his hands on the desk and looked at her. In the stark daylight of the office, she could see him clearly. He was older than her, maybe mid-30s. His face was structurally harsh, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed by dark stubble. But it was his eyes that arrested her. They were that same flat, deadened black. They looked at her not as a woman, but as a problem on a board. "Sloane," he said. The way he dragged the vowel made it sound like an accusation. "You have my phone," she said. She crossed her arms over her chest, trying to stop the shivering. "And my keys." Vincent leaned back in his leather chair. He opened a drawer and pulled out her cracked iPhone and her keyring. He set them on the edge of the desk. "You caused a problem for me on Saturday," he said. His voice was level. No anger, just a statement of fact. "I kissed you for 3 seconds, Sloane countered. I apologized. What kind of fragile ego requires kidnapping a woman from her office over a bruised lip, a muscle feathered in Vincent's jaw? It was the only sign that her words had registered. "I don't care about the kiss. I care about the photographer." Sloane frowned. "What photographer?" Vincent reached into the file on his desk. He pulled out an 8x10 glossy photograph and slid it across the smooth wood. Sloane walked forward slowly. She looked down at the photo. It was a picture of her and Vincent at the wedding. The angle was taken from the terrace, zooming in through the glass doors. It caught the exact moment her hands were on his lapels, pulling him down. Her face was partially obscured, but Vincent's profile was clear, his hand on her waist. "Someone took a picture," she said, confused. "So what? It was a wedding. There were photographers everywhere." "That wasn't the wedding photographer," Vincent said coldly. "That was a federal agent. The man you decided to use as a prop is currently under surveillance by the FBI. I was at that club to have a quiet, undocumented meeting with a city councilman. A meeting that was supposed to remain entirely off the grid." Sloane stared at him. The words took a moment to piece themselves together in her brain. "Under surveillance by the FBI. Who are you?" she whispered. Vincent stood up. He was taller than she remembered. He walked around the desk, his footsteps silent on the hardwood floor. He stopped 3 feet away from her. The smell of sandalwood and smoke returned, thicker this time. "I run the port," Vincent said simply. "I move things in. I move things out. The feds have been trying to put me in a cage for 4 years. They follow me. They wait for me to make a mistake." He gestured to the photograph. "And then, a woman I have never seen before in my life throws herself at me in a public venue, creating a scene, drawing every eye in the room, including the federal agent parked in a catering van outside." Sloane felt the blood drain from her face. "I didn't know. Ignorance isn't an excuse I entertain. What do you want from me?" she asked. Her voice cracked. The reality of the situation was crashing down on her. The men in the ill-fitting suits, the meat-packing plant. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a syndicate. She had dragged a mob boss into her pathetic post-breakup drama. Vincent looked down at her. He studied her face, taking in the pale skin, the wide eyes, the nervous tremor in her jaw. The feds ran your plates from the cab you took. They know who you are. They think you're a connection. A mule, a mistress, a weak link, Vincent said. He tilted his head. They are going to approach you, Sloane. They are going to ask you what I told you at the bar. They are going to threaten you with conspiracy charges to see if you flip. I don't know anything, she practically yelled. Tell them that. I'm an architect's assistant. They won't believe you, Vincent said flatly. And I can't afford a wild card running around, talking to the FBI, panicking under pressure. He took a step closer. Sloane instinctively took a step back, but her back hit the heavy oak desk. She was trapped. Vincent placed one hand on the desk beside her hip, leaning in slightly. We have two options, he said softly. The proximity was suffocating. Option 1. You disappear. My men put you on a boat tonight. You start over in a country that doesn't have an extradition treaty. You never see your sister, your apartment, or your miserable job again. Sloane swallowed hard. And option 2, Vincent's eyes locked onto hers. The flat void in them shifted, revealing something darker, something calculating and ruthless. Option 2, he murmured. You lean into the lie you started. Sloane blinked. What? You wanted everyone at that wedding to think you were with me, Vincent said. Now, the FBI thinks you're with me. So, we give them what they want to see. You're going to be my alibi. You're going to be my very public, very dedicated girlfriend. When they come asking, you tell them I was whispering sweet nothings in your ear. You keep my name clean, and I keep you breathing. He reached up. His thumb lightly brushed the line of her jaw. The touch was feather light, but it felt like a brand. You started this, Sloane, Vincent said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. Now we're going to finish it. Together. Paranoia is a physical weight. It sits at the base of the skull, pulling the posture forward, making every shadow stretch a little too long. Sloane felt it the moment she walked out of her apartment building on Wednesday morning. The sky was the color of wet cement. The autumn wind bit through her trench coat, but the chill on her skin was secondary to the crawling sensation on the back of her neck. Vincent had given her back her phone, her keys, and her life, with one string attached. Wait for them to come to you. She didn't have to wait long. She stopped at the corner bodega for a black coffee. As she stepped back out onto the sidewalk, a grey sedan idled by the curb. The passenger side door opened. Two men stepped out. They didn't wear ill-fitting suits like Vincent's muscle. They wore cheap, off-the-rack navy suits. They wore sensible shoes. They carried an air of exhausted, bureaucratic authority. Sloane Davis? The taller one asked. He flipped open a leather wallet, flashing a gold shield before she could process it. Special Agent Hayes, FBI. This is Agent Bennett. We need a few minutes of your time. Sloane's grip tightened on her paper cup. The coffee burned her fingertips. I'm on my way to work. We can do this at your office in front of David and the rest of the architectural team, Hayes offered, his voice perfectly polite. Or we can do it right here in the car. Your call. It wasn't a choice. Sloane walked to the sedan and slid into the back seat. The doors locked with a heavy, definitive thud. Bennett got in the driver's seat. Hayes sat in the back with her, leaving 2 feet of tense space between them. The car smelled like old coffee grounds and synthetic pine air freshener. How long have you been seeing Vincent Costa? Hayes asked. He didn't pull out a notepad. He just stared at her, his eyes assessing her the way a mechanic looks at a busted transmission. Sloane swallowed the lump of panic in her throat. She remembered the cold, flat void in Vincent's eyes. You lean into the lie you started. A few months, she lied. Her voice sounded alarmingly steady. She channeled every ounce of her recent heartbreak, twisting the raw, humiliated energy of Carter's betrayal into the performance. We keep it quiet. Quiet, Hayes repeated. He pulled a manila folder from the seat pocket in front of him. You kissed him in front of 200 people at the Highland Country Club on Saturday. We had a fight, I was making a point. Bennett snorted from the front seat. A fight? About what? Which shipping container to hide the unregistered firearms in? Sloane looked at the back of Bennett's head. About him working too much. I don't know anything about shipping containers. Vincent imports olive oil and wine. He owns a logistics company. Hayes opened the folder. He didn't show her a picture of the kiss this time. He showed her a photograph taken at night. It was grainy. It showed a loading dock. 3 men were kneeling on the concrete, their hands zip-tied behind their backs. Vincent stood over them. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was holding a metal crowbar. His face was devoid of expression. Does this look like olive oil to you, Sloane? Hayes asked softly. Sloane forced herself not to flinch. Her stomach pitched violently. The man she had grabbed at the bar wasn't just a white-collar criminal. The violence in the photograph was visceral, brutal, and entirely real. I don't know what that is, she said, handing the photo back. She made sure her hand didn't shake. It looks like a movie set, or Photoshop. Vincent is a businessman. Hayes sighed. He closed the folder. You're a smart girl. No criminal record. Good credit. You design office buildings. You're out of your depth, Sloane. Costa uses people. He finds clean slates, people with no ties to the life, and he uses them to move money or provide cover. When he's done, they end up taking the fall. Or they end up in the harbor. He wouldn't do that to me, Sloane said. She lowered her eyes, playing the part of the fiercely loyal, slightly naive girlfriend. He loves me. The words tasted like ash. Hayes studied her for a long, agonizing minute. He was looking for the crack. He was looking for the tell. Sloane held her breath, staring at the synthetic fabric of the car seat. If you decide you want out, Hayes said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a plain white business card. You call this number. Day or night. Because when the indictment comes down, we won't distinguish between the man holding the crowbar and the woman giving him his alibi. He placed the card on the seat next to her. The door locks clicked open. Sloane got out. Her legs felt like hollow reeds. She didn't look back as the grey sedan pulled away into the morning traffic. She stood on the sidewalk for 10 seconds trying to remember how to breathe. You did good. Sloane jumped. Standing in the alleyway between the bodega and a dry cleaner was the gaunt man. Arthur. He was smoking a cigarette, leaning against the brick wall. He had been there the whole time. Watching, listening. He flicked the cigarette butt onto the pavement and crushed it with the toe of his shoe. Mr. Costa will pick you up at 8 tonight. Wear something nice. We're going out. The dress arrived at her office at 2 in the afternoon in a matte black garment bag. Sloane stared at it hanging on the back of her office door. It was a forest green silk gown. It was simple, backless, and cost more than her car. There was no note. There didn't need to be. At exactly 8 o'clock, a black Maybach pulled up to the curb outside her apartment. Sloane walked out, the silk whispering against her skin. The autumn air raised goosebumps on her bare arms. Arthur held the rear door open. He didn't look at her. She slid into the back seat. Vincent was already there. He was wearing a midnight blue tuxedo. The tailoring was flawless, weaponizing his broad shoulders. He looked up from a tablet resting on his knee. The interior of the car smelled faintly of that same intoxicating blend. Sandalwood, ozone, and danger. His eyes swept over her. The flat, deadened look didn't change, but his gaze lingered for a fraction of a second on the plunge of the silk at her collarbone. You handled the feds well, Vincent said. He turned the tablet off and set it aside. They showed me a picture of you with a crowbar, Sloane said flatly. She wasn't going to play coy. She was terrified, but the terror was crystallizing into a hard, cynical anger. Are you going to beat me with a crowbar if I use the wrong fork tonight? Vincent didn't blink. Only if it's the salad fork. It was a joke, delivered with absolute bone-dry seriousness. Sloane stared at him, entirely unsure how to process it. The men on the dock stole 3 shipments of pharmaceuticals meant for a free clinic in the South Ward, Vincent said, looking out the tinted window. I don't kill people for fun, Sloane. I maintain order. The police don't maintain order. They maintain the status quo. There's a difference. So you're a vigilante, she mocked, crossing her arms. I'm a businessman who protects his investments. He turned his head, locking eyes with her. And right now, you are an investment. The car pulled up to an exclusive Italian restaurant in the city's financial district. It was the kind of place that didn't have prices on the menu. The kind of place where politicians and hedge fund managers went to carve up the city over truffles and Barolo. "We are going inside," Vincent said, his voice dropping into that low, gravelly register that demanded absolute obedience. "You are going to smile. You are going to touch my arm. If someone asks, we met at a charity auction 3 months ago, you bid on a vintage Rolex, I outbid you, I bought you a drink to make up for it. I don't know anything about vintage watches. Then let me do the talking." He stepped out of the car and offered her his hand. Sloane hesitated. Then she placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, firm, and calloused. The moment they walked through the double mahogany doors, the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. It wasn't a sudden silence, but a subtle recalibration of the room's energy. Eyes darted toward them. Whispers sparked behind linen napkins. The maitre d' practically tripped over himself, rushing forward. "Mr. Costa, your usual table is ready." Vincent placed his hand on the small of Sloane's bare back. The touch was electric. It sent a shockwave up her spine. His fingers were hot against her skin. He guided her through the dining room, his presence parting the sea of wealthy patrons like a dark ship cutting through water. They were seated at a corner booth, secluded but highly visible. The perfect stage. A waiter appeared instantly, poured water and vanished. "Smile," Vincent murmured. He picked up his menu. Sloane forced the corners of her mouth up. She looked across the table at him. The candlelight flickered over the harsh angles of his face, softening the shadows under his eyes. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "You could have hired an actress, an escort, someone who knows how to play this game." "An actress leaves a paper trail," Vincent replied, not looking up from the wine list. "An escort has a price, which means she can be bought by the opposition. You fell into my lap. You already laid the groundwork in front of a federal agent. The narrative is set. Changing it now raises flags." He closed the menu and set it down. He looked at her. "Besides," he added, his dark eyes tracing the line of her jaw, "you have a certain desperate authenticity. You kiss like a woman drowning." Sloane's face flooded with heat. It wasn't embarrassment. It was fury. "I kissed you because my ex-fiancé was walking toward me with a woman who is practically a teenager. I was humiliated." "I know," Vincent said calmly. "Carter Hayes, equity analyst, pulled a 6-figure bonus last year. Broke off your engagement on a Tuesday via a text message." Sloane froze. "You looked into him." "I looked into everything that touches you. It's my job to eliminate blind spots." Vincent leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. "He's a coward, Sloane. You threw yourself at a stranger because you couldn't bear to let a coward see you bleed. Don't psychoanalyze me. You don't know me. I know that right now you're terrified of me, but you're more terrified of looking weak," Vincent stated. He reached across the table. His hand hovered over hers for a second before he gently laid his palm over her knuckles. It was a gesture of profound, manufactured intimacy for the audience in the room. But his grip was grounding. "Eat your dinner, Sloane," he said softly. "Play the part. Survive the feds. And when this is over, you can go back to your safe, boring office parks." Sloane looked down at his hand covering hers. She should have pulled away. She should have felt repulsed by the blood on his hands. But sitting across from the most dangerous man in the city, the memory of Carter's pitying smile faded into static. For the first time in 6 months, she didn't feel heartbroken. She felt alive. The lie became a routine. For 3 weeks, Sloane lived a double life. By day, she was the quiet, efficient logistics coordinator at the architectural firm. By night, she was the polished, enigmatic companion of Vincent Costa. They attended galas, they sat courtside at basketball games, they ate at restaurants where the chefs came out to shake Vincent's hand. It was exhausting. It was a high-wire act with no net. Every touch, every glance had to be calculated. The FBI was always watching. Agent Hayes had popped up twice more, once outside her gym, once at the grocery store, just to remind her he was there. But the hardest part wasn't the feds. The hardest part was Vincent. He was an impenetrable wall of composure. He never yelled. He never lost his temper. He treated her with a cold, detached courtesy that was maddening. Yet, when his hand rested on her waist in public, or when he leaned in to whisper instructions against her ear. The physical proximity sent a jolt of pure adrenaline straight to her core. She hated how much she anticipated the knock of his driver at her door. On a rainy Thursday night, the routine shattered. It wasn't a mafia hit. It wasn't an FBI raid. It was an engagement party. Sloane's best friend from college, a woman completely oblivious to Sloane's new underworld ties, was celebrating her engagement at a rooftop lounge downtown. Sloane had begged Vincent to let her go alone. It was a private event. No press, no feds, just her old life. Vincent had agreed, sending Arthur to wait in the SUV down the street. Sloane stood by the open bar, wearing a simple black dress, nursing a gin and tonic. The rooftop was enclosed by glass, the rain streaking down the panes, distorting the city lights into colourful blurs. She was actually relaxing. The knot in her shoulders had finally loosened. She laughed at a joke her friend made. For a fleeting hour, she was just Sloane again. Then she heard the voice. "Sloane, wow, you actually came." She stiffened. She turned slowly. Carter was standing there. He was alone, holding a craft beer. He looked exactly the same. The same perfectly styled hair. The same expensive but slightly generic watch. But the smug, pitying aura he usually carried had been replaced by something sharp and ugly. "Carter," Sloane said evenly, "I'm surprised you're not with Paige." "She's at a bridal shower thing," Carter said dismissively. He took a step closer, invading her personal space. He smelled like generic cologne and stale beer. "I've been hearing things about you." Sloane took a step back. "People talk. They say you're dating Vincent Costa." Carter let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Vincent fucking Costa? Are you insane?" "It's none of your business, Carter. Excuse me." She tried to step around him, but he shifted, blocking her path. His face flushed with sudden anger. It wasn't concern for her safety. It was bruised ego. The woman he had discarded, the woman who was supposed to be weeping into her ice cream, had upgraded to a man who owned half the city. "You grabbed him at my wedding!" Carter hissed, keeping his voice low so the surrounding guests wouldn't hear. "You caused a scene. You embarrassed me in front of Paige's family, and now you're parading around with a mobster to get back at me. You think this is about you?" Sloane stared at him, genuinely appalled. "The world doesn't revolve around you." "You're pathetic, Sloane," Carter sneered, stepping closer. He reached out and grabbed her upper arm. His grip was tight, digging into her skin. "You're playing a dangerous game to make me jealous, and it's pathetic. He's going to ruin you." "Let go of me," she said, her voice dropping. Panic flared in her chest, but it was quickly eclipsed by a surge of pure, white-hot rage. "You need to wake up and stop acting like a—" Carter didn't finish the sentence. A hand clamped onto Carter's shoulder. It wasn't a tap. It was a grip that dug into the nerve cluster beneath the collarbone. Carter gasped, his knees buckling slightly. His hand snapped away from Sloane's arm as if he'd been burned. Vincent stood behind Carter. He wore a tailored black overcoat, rain glistening on the wool shoulders. His hair was damp. He hadn't been invited. He shouldn't have been there. But he was. Vincent didn't look at Carter. His eyes were locked on Sloane. He saw the red mark forming on her bare arm. The flat, deadened void in his eyes vanished. In its place was a terrifying, quiet violence. "Is there a problem here?" Vincent asked. His voice was barely a whisper. It cut through the ambient noise of the party like a scalpel. Carter stumbled back, rubbing his shoulder. The colour drained from his face entirely. He recognized Vincent immediately. The bravado he'd displayed seconds ago evaporated, leaving a terrified shell. "No," Carter stammered. "No problem. We were just catching up." Vincent finally turned his head to look at Carter. The look was devoid of anger. It was worse. It was the look of a man evaluating a pest before stepping on it. "You touched her," Vincent said. It wasn't a question. Carter swallowed hard. I just... Vincent took one step forward. The sheer predatory grace of the movement caused 3 people standing nearby to subconsciously back away. "If you ever touch her again," Vincent said, his tone conversational. "If you ever speak to her again, if you ever breathe the air in her immediate vicinity, I won't kill you, Carter. That's too brief. I will bankrupt you. I will take your job, your assets, and that shiny new bride. I will erase you from the system. Do you understand me? Carter nodded frantically. He couldn't speak. He turned and practically ran toward the elevators. The silence around them was absolute. The guests nearest to them were staring, wide-eyed. Vincent turned back to Sloane. He offered his arm. We're leaving. Sloane didn't argue. She slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow. Her fingers trembled against the damp wool of his coat. They walked out of the lounge, stepped into the private elevator, and the doors slid shut, sealing them in silence. As the elevator descended, the adrenaline crash hit Sloane. She leaned back against the mirrored wall, taking a shaky breath. She looked at Vincent. He was staring at the floor numbers ticking down. His jaw clenched so tight, a muscle ticked in his cheek. You were spying on me, she said. Her voice was weak. Arthur called me. He said your ex walked in, Vincent replied, not looking at her. You didn't have to do that. It's supposed to be a fake arrangement for the feds. Defending my honor against a drunk equity analyst isn't in the job description. The elevator dinged. They stepped out into the underground parking garage. The air was cool and smelled of exhaust. The Maybach was idling 20 yards away. Vincent stopped walking. He turned to face her. The harsh fluorescent lights of the garage cast sharp shadows across his face. The feds weren't there, he said quietly. I know. No cameras, no agents. Vincent took a step closer. The space between them evaporated. He reached out. His fingers brushed the red mark on her upper arm. His touch was incredibly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence he had just threatened. I didn't do it for the audience, Sloane. Sloane's breath hitched. She looked up into his eyes. The calculating mob boss was gone. The wall was down, just a fraction of an inch, but enough for her to see the fire burning underneath. Why did you do it then? She whispered. Vincent's gaze dropped to her mouth. The memory of their collision at the wedding hung in the heavy air between them. He stepped into her space, his chest brushing against hers. He didn't kiss her. He simply leaned down, his lips a millimeter from her ear. Because what's mine? He murmured, his voice a dark, possessive promise. Stays mine, real or not. The illusion of control is the first casualty of war. Sloane learned this at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, 4 days after the incident in the parking garage. She was in her kitchen, waiting for the espresso machine to heat up. She wore oversized sweatpants and a faded college t-shirt. Her phone sat on the marble counter, silent. Vincent hadn't contacted her since he dropped her off. The ghost of his breath against her ear had haunted her sleep for 3 consecutive nights. The knock at the door wasn't polite. It was heavy, rhythmic, and demanding. Sloane froze. Arthur usually texted when he was downstairs. Vincent never showed up unannounced. She walked to the peephole. The hallway was crowded with dark windbreakers. Stenciled across the back of the nearest one were 3 bright yellow letters. FBI. Her stomach hit the floor. She unlocked the deadbolt. The door was pushed open before she could turn the handle completely. Special Agent Hayes stood on her welcome mat. He didn't look tired today. He looked energized. He looked like a hunter who had just cornered his prey. Good morning, Sloane, Hayes said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Agent Bennett and 3 other agents filed in behind him, immediately fanning out across her small living room. We have a warrant to search the premises. Bennett, take the bedroom. What is this? Sloane demanded, crossing her arms to hide the sudden tremor in her hands. You can't just barge in here. A federal judge disagrees, Hayes replied smoothly. He handed her a folded piece of paper. It was a search warrant, signed and stamped. Sit at the kitchen island. Keep your hands where I can see them. For 2 hours they tore her life apart. They emptied her drawers. They pulled the cushions off her sofa. They seized her laptop, her iPad, and her phone. Sloane sat on a bar stool, watching her carefully curated, perfectly normal life being dismantled by men wearing latex gloves. She said nothing. She kept her face blank. Vincent's voice echoed in her head. Ignorance isn't an excuse. Play the part. When they finished, her apartment looked like it had been hit by a localized hurricane. Hayes walked over to the kitchen island. He placed a small, black plastic device on the counter. It was the size of a coin. Do you know what this is? He asked. Sloane shook her head. No. It's a listening device. Military grade. We pulled it from the underside of your coffee table. Hayes leaned in, resting his hands on the counter. Did Vincent put that there to keep tabs on his fake girlfriend? Sloane didn't flinch. Vincent wouldn't bug my apartment. He doesn't need to. Really? Hayes chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He pulled a digital recorder from his pocket and pressed play. Static hissed from the small speaker. Then a voice. Carter's voice, distorted, but clear enough. You're parading around with a mobster to get back at me. Then, Vincent's voice. Low, lethal, vibrating with quiet menace. I won't kill you, Carter. That's too brief. I will bankrupt you. I will erase you from the system. Hayes paused the recording. Sloane's mouth went dry. The rooftop lounge. They had bugged Carter, or they had parabolic microphones aimed at the glass. Conspiracy to commit extortion, uttering threats of bodily harm. Hayes listed off on his fingers. And that's just the appetizer. We raided Costa's shipping yard at 4 this morning. We found 40 crates of untaxed firearms hidden inside shipments of imported marble. Your boyfriend is looking at 20 years in federal prison. The kitchen seemed to tilt. Sloane gripped the edge of the marble counter. 20 years. Here is how this plays out, Hayes said, his tone dropping the faux politeness. We know you aren't a shot caller, Sloane. You're a civilian who made a really stupid mistake at a wedding and got dragged into a syndicate. We have you on tape standing by while a known crime boss threatens a citizen. We can charge you as an accessory. You will lose your job. You will do time. He pulled a chair out and sat across from her. Or, Hayes said softly, you testify. You get on the stand and confirm that Vincent Costa threatened Carter. You tell the jury what you know about his meetings at the restaurant. You become a cooperating witness. We put you in protective custody. You walk away clean. Sloane looked at the black listening device on the counter. She looked at Hayes's expectant, hungry eyes. She thought about her quiet, boring office. She thought about Carter's pitying smile. Then, she thought about the weight of Vincent's coat, the calloused heat of his hand over hers, the way he looked at her in the parking garage, not as a prop, not as a liability, but as something that belonged to him. Because what's mine stays mine. The panic in her chest evaporated. It was replaced by a strange, icy calm. It was a terrifying realization. She didn't want to walk away clean. The clean world was full of cowards and spreadsheets. I don't know what you're talking about, Sloane said, looking Hayes dead in the eye. Hayes frowned. You just heard the tape. I heard a heavily edited recording of a private conversation, Sloane replied, her voice steady, mimicking Vincent's flat, emotionless cadence. My boyfriend was defending me from an aggressive, intoxicated ex. It was a heated argument. No crime was committed. And as for whatever you found at the port, Vincent runs a logistics firm. He doesn't pack the crates. He just moves them. Hayes stared at her. The disbelief on his face slowly morphed into disgust. You're making a mistake. He won't protect you. When the ship sinks, he'll use you as a life raft. Are you arresting me, Agent Hayes? Not today. Then get out of my apartment. Hayes stood up slowly. He scooped up the listening device and the recorder. You think you're untouchable because he touched you. You're just another piece on his board, Sloane. When he goes down, you're going with him. He signaled to the other agents. They filed out, leaving the front door hanging open. Sloane sat alone in the ruins of her living room. The silence was deafening. She had just lied to the FBI. She had just crossed the line from innocent bystander to active accomplice. She waited for the regret to hit her. She waited for the tears. Neither came. A black town car idled on her street for 3 hours. It wasn't the Maybach. It was a discreet, armored sedan. At noon, her replacement phone rang. It was Arthur. Come downstairs, use the service elevator. Sloane threw on a heavy wool coat over her clothes, grabbed her keys, and left her wrecked apartment behind. She didn't look back. Arthur was waiting in the alley. His face was bruised. A fresh bandage covered the bridge of his nose. He opened the back door for her. He didn't speak. They drove out of the city, heading north into the dense, forested hills of the surrounding county. The roads grew narrower, winding through heavy autumn foliage. The sky was the color of a bruised plum, heavy with impending snow. Sloane watched the trees blur past. Where are we going? Away from the noise, Arthur grunted from the front seat. An hour later, they pulled up to an isolated cabin. Calling it a cabin was a gross understatement. It was a modern fortress built into the side of a mountain, constructed of dark wood, steel, and reinforced glass. There were no neighboring houses. There was only the wind howling through the pines. 2 men carrying tactical rifles stood by the front entrance. They nodded at Arthur as he parked the car. Sloane got out. The cold air bit at her lungs. She followed Arthur up the stone steps and through a heavy oak door. The interior was stark, minimalist, and deeply masculine. A fire roared in a massive stone hearth. Sitting on a leather sofa facing the fire was Vincent. He didn't look like a tailored businessman today. He wore a dark Henley, the sleeves pushed up. His knuckles were bruised, the skin split and raw. He held a glass of scotch, staring into the flames. "Leave us," Vincent said without turning around. Arthur closed the front door, leaving them alone. Sloane walked slowly into the living room. The smell of wood smoke and scotch filled the air. She stood behind the sofa. "The feds raided my apartment," she said quietly. "I know," Vincent replied. His voice was hoarse. It lacked its usual commanding gravel. He sounded exhausted. "They hit the port at 4. They hit 3 of my warehouses at 5. They seized my accounts. Half my crew is currently sitting in holding cells downtown." He took a slow sip of his drink. "They played me a tape," Sloane continued. She walked around the sofa and stood between him and the fire. She wanted to see his face. "They recorded you threatening Carter. They wanted me to flip. They offered me protective custody." Vincent finally looked up. The flat void in his eyes was shattered. He looked hunted. The harsh lines of his face were drawn tight with strain. He looked at her, searching for the fear he expected to see, searching for the betrayal. "And?" he asked softly. "I told them you were a legitimate businessman defending his girlfriend from a drunk." Vincent set the glass down on the coffee table. The crystal clicked sharply against the wood. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, clasping his bruised hands together. "You shouldn't have done that," he said. The words were heavy. "The game is over, Sloane. He isn't playing anymore. He has enough to freeze my operations. The raid on the port was a warning shot. Tomorrow, the grand jury convenes. They are going to issue warrants. Federal warrants. Then we fight it in court. There is no we." Vincent stood up. He paced toward the window, looking out at the darkening forest. "I brought you into this to be a shield, to be a distraction. It worked for a while. But the board has changed. You are a civilian. If you stay anywhere near me now, they will tear your life apart just to get leverage on me." He turned back to face her. "Arthur has a passport for you," Vincent said flatly. "It has a new name, a new date of birth. There is a bag in the hallway with $250,000 in untraceable cash. A plane is waiting at a private airstrip 30 miles from here. It will take you to Switzerland. You stay there for 6 months. By the time you come back, this will all be over. I'll be in a cage, or Hayes will be dead." Sloane stared at him. The firelight flickered across his face, highlighting the violence and the exhaustion in equal measure. He was letting her go. He was giving her exactly what she had wanted 4 weeks ago. An out, a clean slate, a way to escape the monster she had grabbed at the bar. She looked at the hallway. She saw the black duffel bag sitting by the door. Freedom, safety. Sloane walked toward the bag. Vincent watched her. His jaw tightened. He didn't move to stop her. He had made his choice. He was a ruthless syndicate boss, a man who crushed his enemies without hesitation, but he drew the line at dragging her down with him. Sloane stopped in front of the bag. She looked down at it. $250,000. A new life. She turned around. She walked back to the fireplace, closing the distance between them until she was standing inches away from him. "No," she said. Vincent frowned. "This isn't a negotiation, Sloane. It's an evacuation." "I said no." Sloane tilted her chin up, meeting his dark, intense gaze. "I'm not getting on a plane. I'm not hiding in Switzerland. And I'm definitely not going back to designing office parks while you take a fall." "You don't understand the machinery at work here," Vincent warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "This isn't a game of pretend anymore. If you stay, you are part of the syndicate. You are complicit. If you stay, there is no going back to the light." "I don't want the light!" She fired back, her voice barely shaking. "The light is Carter. The light is a life where people smile at you while they stab you in the back. At least in your world, the monsters wear their scars on the outside. She reached out. She didn't grab his lapels this time. She gently took his bruised, raw hand in hers. His fingers twitched, a primal instinct to pull away from the tenderness. But she held on tight. "You told me that what's yours stays yours," Sloane murmured. The heat from the fire baked her skin, but it was nothing compared to the heat radiating from him. "Does that still apply?" Vincent stared down at her. The tension in his massive frame was palpable. It felt like standing next to a coiled spring about to snap. He looked at her eyes, searching for hesitation, searching for the terrified girl from the country club. She wasn't there anymore. With a sudden, violent motion, Vincent pulled her in. His mouth crashed down on hers. There was no hesitation this time. There was no cold, calculating void. It was a kiss born of desperation, adrenaline, and possessive fury. It was bruising and deep, a claiming of territory. He tasted like scotch and copper. Sloane didn't flinch. She kissed him back just as hard, her hands threading into his dark hair, pulling him closer, his arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her off the floor entirely. He backed her up against the heavy stone of the fireplace, his body pressing hers into the rock. The fire roared beside them, casting long, frantic shadows against the ceiling. When he finally broke the kiss, they were both breathing hard. He rested his forehead against hers. His eyes were completely dark, filled with a terrifying, absolute certainty. "If you stay," Vincent rasped, his breath hot against her skin, "you belong to this life. You belong to me. You don't get to ask for a way out when it gets ugly." Sloane looked up at him. She saw the blood on his knuckles. She saw the empire crumbling around him. "Then show me how to build it back," she said. 2 years later, the rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse office, distorting the city skyline into a blur of grey and neon. Sloane sat behind a massive mahogany desk. She wore a tailored crimson pantsuit. Her hair was pulled back into a sharp, uncompromising chignon. She was reviewing a ledger on a secure tablet. The door opened. Arthur walked in. He looked exactly the same, perhaps a few more grey hairs at his temples. He placed a leather folder on her desk. "The union delegates agreed to the new terms at the port," Arthur said, his voice respectful. "No strike. The shipments resume at midnight." "And the alderman?" Sloane asked, her eyes not leaving the screen. "He understands his campaign contributions will be withheld if he pushes the zoning laws near the warehouses." Arthur paused. Agent Hayes was seen poking around the diner near the docks again. Sloane finally looked up. Her eyes held a cool, detached authority that commanded the room effortlessly. The naive architect assistant was dead and buried. In her place sat a woman who understood power, leverage, and the cold mechanics of fear. "Let Hayes eat his pie," Sloane said evenly. "He doesn't have a warrant and he doesn't have an informant. Let him freeze in his sedan." Arthur nodded. "Yes, ma'am." He turned and exited the office, closing the heavy door softly behind him. Sloane stood up. She walked over to the wet bar in the corner of the office and poured 2 fingers of scotch. The federal grand jury had indicted Vincent 24 months ago. They had arrested him. They had paraded him in front of the cameras, but they hadn't counted on Sloane. She hadn't run. She had stayed. She had taken the $250,000 and hired the most vicious defense attorney on the eastern seaboard. She had systematically taken over the legitimate logistics fronts, ensuring the money kept moving, while Vincent sat in a cell awaiting trial. She learned the ledgers. She learned the players. She learned how to smile at politicians while subtly threatening their livelihoods. She held the empire together with blood, scotch, and sheer, uncompromising willpower. When the trial finally happened, the prosecution's star witness, a dock worker looking for a plea deal, mysteriously decided to plead the fifth after a quiet, undocumented conversation with Arthur. The wiretap audio was deemed inadmissible due to a technicality filed by the expensive lawyers. The case fell apart. The door to the private elevator chimed. Vincent walked in. He looked sharp. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie. The scars on his knuckles had faded to thin white lines. The aura of danger around him hadn't diminished. If anything, surviving the federal gauntlet had honed it to a razor's edge. He walked across the plush carpet, bypassing the guest chairs, and stepped directly behind her at the window. He didn't say a word. He just wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his solid chest. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply. Sloane leaned back into him, resting her hands over his. The tension of the day bled out of her muscles. "Arthur says the port is clear," Vincent murmured against her skin, his gravelly voice vibrating through her. "It is," Sloane replied, taking a sip of the scotch. "The alderman is back in line too." Vincent turned her around in his arms. He took the glass of scotch from her hand, took a sip, and set it on the window ledge. He looked down at her. The flat void in his eyes was gone permanently when he looked at her. It was replaced by a dark, consuming devotion. A reverence reserved only for the woman who had walked into the fire with him. He traced the line of her jaw with his thumb. "You look tired," he noted. "Heavy is the head that manages the logistics firm." She mocked lightly, a cynical smile touching her lips. Vincent didn't smile. He leaned down, brushing his lips against hers. It was a gentle kiss, a stark contrast to the violence that governed their world. "Carter Hayes called the office today," Vincent said softly. Sloane stiffened slightly. She hadn't heard that name in 2 years. Carter had faded into total obscurity after his firm mysteriously downsized him. "Why?" she asked. "He wanted a loan. He said his wife left him. He said he was desperate." Vincent's eyes locked onto hers, waiting for her reaction. Testing the waters. Sloane looked out at the rainy city. She thought about the botanical garden, the pastel chiffon, the crushing, humiliating pity. She looked back at Vincent. Her face was perfectly blank. "Tell Arthur to block the number," she said coldly. "We aren't a charity." A slow, dangerous smile finally curved Vincent's lips. He pulled her flush against his chest, his grip tightening protectively. "That's my girl," he whispered. Desperation had tasted like cheap champagne. Power tasted like scotch and gun oil. Sloane wrapped her arms around the monster's neck, entirely at peace with the dark. Sloane didn't just survive the underworld, she conquered it. She grabbed a stranger to save her pride and ended up claiming a king, proving that sometimes the only way to beat the monsters is to become the one who holds their leash. What did you think of Sloane's transformation from a heartbroken civilian to a syndicate queen? Would you have stayed to rule or taken the bag of cash to Switzerland? Let me know in the comments. If you love this dark, gritty romance, smash that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more intense stories. Turn on notifications. You don't want to miss what's next.